Welcome to all our guests tonight in Rothenberg Hall and online who are joining our 2026 Founders Day program. I'm Karen Lawrence, President of the Huntington, and I am delighted you chose to spend your evening with us. Founders Day began when the small group of Huntington trustees gathered in the rare book reading room on Henry Huntington's birthday to attend a research lecture in his honor. As you can see, Founders Day has greatly expanded. We're delighted to see so many from the Huntington and Caltech communities join us this year in person and in our beautiful Rothenberg Hall and online. Our focus has broadened as well, from a celebration of Henry's birthday to acknowledging the role that he and Arabella Huntington played in entrusting their private estate to the state of California for the purpose of education, research, and the public welfare. Henry Huntington once said that the value of our collections would be measured by the use made of them. On Founders Day in recent years, we've explored the Huntington's relationship with the surrounding communities in San Gabriel Valley. Last year, after the tragic winds and fires that devastated the Pasadena community, we helped bring our communities together in a program called Sewing Community, Living with Octavia E. Butler's Parables, that drew on Butler's archive in our library collection. As many of you know, she was a hometown Pasadena writer who is world-renowned for creating future worlds in her speculative fiction, including her 1993 eerily prescient depiction of devastating fires in our region in January of 2025. That's in Parable of the Sower. About her futurism, Butler once wrote, "I didn't make up the problems. All I did was look around at the problems we're neglecting right now and give them about 30 years to grow into full-fledged disasters." Tonight, it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome another Pasadena neighbor who will help us, like Octavia, understand our world and the possibilities in our future through the scientific imagination. Tom Rosenbaum, the 9th president of Caltech, will be stepping down as president at the end of this academic year after 12 very impressive years at the helm. Tonight, we'll talk about the relationship between our 100-year-old institutions, our shared great debt to the astronomer George Ellery Hale, and more generally, science and the humanities in Pasadena and beyond. On Founders Day, it couldn't be more fitting to look down the street a few blocks away and tell the story of how our two institutions began and how they can continue to guide us in the future. Tom is a physicist and an expert in the quantum mechanical nature of materials. As a non-scientist, I hope he will explain that in the next hour. Your printed program offers a summary of his illustrious career. He's worked at some of the most prestigious research centers and universities, Bell Labs, IBM Watson Research Center, Argonne National Library, and the University of Chicago, where he served as provost and distinguished professor of physics. Beyond his academic credentials, some of you may know he is a man of many interests, including an abiding love of basketball, the Yankees, and the New Yorker. He's a scientist who reads novels and poetry, yay. A few years ago, I was invited to attend a dinner that Tom hosted at Caltech for the board of Carnegie Science, which he opened by quoting from a few lines of a W.B. Yeats poem. You could say that he had me at the first line. in my time at the Huntington in this role, it's been a real pleasure to have such a collegial president at Caltech, as well as to have a friendship with Tom and Kathy, his wife, Kathy Faber, also a Caltech professor and scientist. We hope they continue to join us for events at the Huntington, which they actually have done for the past 7 years. And now, please help me welcome Tom Rosenbaum.
Thank you.
So welcome.
Thank you very much. I heard you talk about Octavia Butler, and my favorite quote from her is, "There's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns." So that's how I'm thinking about tonight.
Did she write that for you? I think that's a great line. Before we begin, you received cards when you walked in, and so please jot down some questions that may occur to you as we talk, and we'll try to get as many as possible for the Q&A. So, okay, let me start by saying congratulations on your incredibly successful run at Caltech.
Thank you.
And you must know that Caltech is a source of great hometown pride for all of us in the San Gabriel Valley, of course beyond as well. But when I arrived at the Huntington, I was told this is the place where the universe was discovered.
Mm-hmm.
And even in this time of hyperbole, it's very hard to top that. So,
Yes, right.
So you're a researcher, a physicist, a teacher, an academic leader. As you step down as president, what are you most looking forward to doing?
I'm looking forward to learning a little more physics. It's been a while since I've really done that. I have a laboratory. It's a mom and pop organization right now in terms of its size, but it keeps me honest. It keeps me off the streets at night. I'm really eager to build up my lab, work with some more students, interact more deeply with colleagues. I think we've talked about it since, of course, you have a distinguished academic career of your own. The wonderful thing about being president of an institution, and particularly an institution like Caltech, which has such incredible people, is you have an excuse to talk to all these interesting people all the time, and most of them want to talk to you.
And they'll still want to talk to you.
I hope
you're no longer president.
We'll do the experiment and see, indeed.
So I said in my intro that I was hoping you would say something about being the quantum mechanical nature of materials and what an expert in that is. Do you have an elevator speech about?
Sure. Can we show the slide? No, I'm joking. I'm interested in understanding the microscopic rules of the road. So quantum mechanics dominates the behavior of microscopic objects. I'm interested in taking a few little magnets, spins, or electrons, or atoms, understanding how when you start building bigger and bigger entities, you make materials. How does quantum mechanics manifest itself? How does the coherence, the fact that they work together as quantum mechanical objects, die? How can you drive systems with external influences, electric fields, magnetic fields, pressure, whatever, to create new kinds of states? So that they actually pay me to do this.
Wow, that was great. Did you?
Well, if you want to come by the lab anytime.
No, I will. But did you make things when you were a kid?
Did I make things? I never took apart automobiles, in part because my parents didn't have a car. But yeah, I like messing with things. I was probably better at taking them apart than putting them back together, though.
Okay. All right. So we promised you history, and we have a lot of history, our institutions. So let's go back to the beginning of Caltech and the Huntington about 100 years ago.
Right.
With astronomer George Ellery Hale starting everything when he arrived in Pasadena from Chicago. And it seems to me it's almost like a setup for a classic joke. An astronomer walked into a bar, only it's the town of Pasadena.
Yeah, yeah.
And he looks around and he says, "Where can I see the stars?"
Yeah.
And there's no place, so he builds Mount Wilson
Right.
Observatory, and he serves as its first director. And that's in 1904.
Right.
And then by 1920, he has helped to shape Caltech,
Right.
and then helped really get the Huntington to be the Huntington.
Right.
His, many people in the audience may know this, but his friend was Henry Huntington. He persuaded his friend, some would say badgered his friend, into giving his private estate
Right.
to the state of California for the purpose of research, of humanities research, and for the use and benefit of the public. And you know, Hale believed that history, art, literature, and science should grow together, not in isolation. And that belief literally shaped the creation of Caltech and the relationship
Right.
between Caltech and the Huntington. So, do you think that Hale's vision 100 years ago is still relevant in 2026?
In some ways, certainly. I mean, Pasadena, right, is an amazing place in terms of its cultural attributes, particularly for a city this size. As I understand it, Hale's vision for the Huntington was a Parthenon in Pasadena. I like the alliteration.
Or Athens of the West?
Yes,
Actually,
right.
Greg Pashala, our board chair, who's a historian and has gone into do research, also said Athens of the West. So I like Parthenon of Pasadena as well. That's very good.
And he, but I think he envisioned Mount Wilson, which was going to be the home of technology, Caltech, which was going to be the basic science, and then, as you say, literature, art, history, at Huntington as a tripartite institution, kind of all brought together. So clearly we've gone our own ways as separate governing organizations, but I do agree that that vision of the interchange, the connections, the richness, bringing people here, right? It's all about people. And you have the Huntington, which is this incredible collection, this incredible fellows program. You have Caltech, which brings together scientists from around the world. And you have not Mount Wilson, but you have other observatories. And of course, Hale went on to build Mount Palomar, which is still an operating observatory afterwards. And as you point out, Huntington and Hale were quite close. Huntington, I believe, came here in 1902, seeing LA as a place that he could, I think, basically recreate his family's activities in terms of building the Transcontinental Railroad, that just electrifying all of Southern California and expanding LA. And that led him to a connection to Caltech. And he interacted with our scientists in terms of electrification. He helped in terms of bringing, so Hale made that connection. Hale helped bring Millikan here, who then connected to the interest that Huntington had in electrification. The hiring of the first director of the Huntington, Max Ferrand, was aided and abetted by Millikan's efforts, is my understanding.
I didn't realize that. From Yale, an American history
Yale.
program.
And in fact, he taught once a week on the history of the Constitution at Caltech. And so you see the kind of echoes of that now too, right? Because we have joint programs, we have people, our students come here, we have people from the Huntington coming and teaching at Caltech. So yeah, it's very much alive. And I think it enriches both our institutions in remarkable ways.
In fact, we've, through the years since Hale and Huntington, continued those collaborations, as you say. with a visual culture program, advanced research in history of science, medicine, and technology. Right now, the Eleanor Searle postdoctoral fellowship in the history of science and technology it's a very interesting collaboration with a faculty member who teaches half-time at Caltech and does research half-time at the Huntington, but also brings its undergraduate class. And Cristiano Zanetti, I think, is in the audience, is our fellow.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about what's important about that kind of partnership that you see.
Well, the collections here are just amazing. As well, you don't know, but Karen knows, of course. Earlier this afternoon, Kathy and I got to go inside the vault and see some of the incredible collection there, and it's jaw-dropping. But it gives you a sense of how science has developed. Obviously not just science, but some of the collection of science, of course. And how people's thought processes and creativity comes out. And we share that as scientists and as humanists. And the kinds of people that we attract to these joint programs are able to walk back and forth between those worlds, use those kinds of insights to enrich their studies. And I think that's the power of what we're talking about. Of course, we're also able to attract people here, as I was saying before, because of the fact that there are these possibilities. And it's not just the Caltech folks who use the research here and teach at Caltech, as you know, but some of your curators come and teach at Caltech. Some of our students come here and see original manuscripts, which, can you imagine? It's fine to go read some cloth-bound version or paperback. You probably don't do that. Sorry, I'm a Luddite. It's all on computer. But to actually hold in your hand something that was created at that time and maybe has marginalia, it's just a different experience.
So Dan Lewis, our curator, took you on a journey. And I'm not sure that everybody knows. Of course, they know we are a humanities and arts and botanical institution, but have very rare books and manuscripts in the history of science, technology, and medicine, and have had that for a long time, and then got the wonderful Burndy collection and Dibner collection in 2006, but building on something. So you said you saw things in the vault.
Right.
What kinds of things did Dan show you?
So everybody would be very jealous. The Galileo manuscript on the moon with the hand drawings of the different phases of the moon. And you can see the craters. It's not this perfect sphere, right? If you look up in the sky, you actually see, because of the development of the telescope, what it looks like. Euclid's axioms, an original edition of that. And then we move to all kinds of different treasures, right? Looking at Thoreau's writings, and there are 7 versions. And so you get to see
Walden?
Walden, I'm sorry. So you get to see the thought process. Not that I could really track it, but you can see things crossed out, things written in. So from a perspective of understanding how he was compiling this, how his ideas changed, were formed over time, it's just something remarkable. A Gutenberg Bible, I must confess, I had no idea. It's a massive object. And I think the story that I like there was Huntington bought it for $50,000. You must know this story. And one of his friends came up to him and said, well, I knew you were in need of the Holy Spirit, but not $50,000 worth. But
I hadn't heard that.
but you see this original, and you see books on vellum and illustrated manuscripts, and you see a development of a technology, if you will, as well as the art that goes with it. So it was a wonderful experience. Thank you for providing that.
But what you're talking about is, a couple of things of the nature of primary materials.
Yeah.
And I think when students, because I think the Caltech students also get to come with the Searle Fellowship, get to see it. And people would always say to us, if you digitize what you have, why do people have to come and see it? But you're recreating some of the reason why it's almost as if you have the impress of the body of the person.
Yes.
And I think that's true of seeing drafts of Walden and how you get it wrong at first, or at least what you think could be improved and keep going, which seems to me that kind of creativity and discipline is true of both science and creative, it's the creative imagination in both.
Absolutely, and I think one of the special aspects of Caltech is it's very idealistic about the creation of knowledge. And we do believe in primary sources and understanding primary sources, and not just reading summaries of what somebody has discovered or what their ideas are, but reading the original portions of it. And I think we share that then, the value of that in the way that you're talking about, how that enters in the humanities.
Yeah, I think it's true. Also, the vault that you mentioned, so that
Yes.
was the inner...
The inner vault.
The
yes,
inner
right,
vault. So
yes,
we
yeah.
have an inner vault. Many of you may know we're doing a library art project. The iconic Myron Hunt south-facing will be we will look the same, and that, of course, we're preserving, and that's historic, doing some other modifications. But when you bring up the vault, it reminded me that I just found out that 3 Caltech professors in 1952, I think, advised the Huntington on how to build this vault so it would be atomic bomb resilient, actually.
Right.
Not proof, right? From what I read, and I actually saw the letters that somebody sent me, that a direct hit would not have saved Hamlet. But
we saw the Hamlet ones too. Yes,
you
that's
said,
right.
So, a certain, concrete and 30 feet down was really, but I think that goes back to the collaboration that we drew on your professors for help with envisioning that.
Yeah,
so,
it's a remarkable edifice. I mean, of course, if an atomic bomb would hit right there, the temperatures would be so high it would melt.
Yeah,
but
right.
it's this massive door that's that thick, and steel and concrete around, and Dan let me pull it open, and it's really, it weighs, tens of thousands of pounds, but so I have not been working out in the gym that much, but it's really well gimbaled, but you still have to really yank this thing. It's really quite something.
Some of the Huntington people in the audience, or Caltech, if you attended the Huntington Ball last time, because we had moved everything out in preparation for construction, it was the first and last time that people had champagne in the inner vault.
Wow. I hope you removed
You'll be happy to hear that
collection.
Hamlet was removed from it before we did that, but it was quite an experience. So kind of a little bit on the same theme, and then we'll move to other things. You became president of Caltech in 2014.
Correct.
And during your inaugural address, you said, and I quote, "The arts help us to function as life thrusts us into situations where we have to conceive problems outside of the structures that define them. It provides us with an elasticity of thought and familiarity of experience, not fully our own, while challenging us to define the essence of what we believe." Do you remember that?
I do, although it is always somewhat uncomfortable to be quoted back to yourself. Yeah.
So when and how did you develop your feeling about that? Is there something in your own life? I mean, I know you read poetry and you can quote Cicero. How did you think about the function of the arts and humanities in such an important way?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer, to always figure out where these strands come from. I think my parents were European. I think part of what I was taught in terms of what education meant was very much formed by that kind of broader look at how culture played its role. My parents were not scientists. I grew up during the Apollo moon landings, and that really, I think, intrigued me about science. But I always loved the English and history courses, and that stayed with me. And I did think, actually, so I'm a frustrated humanist. I did think about pursuing that.
I'm not even a frustrated scientist. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of the problem there is that the language is a little different. One of my favorites, sorry, I'll digress a little and come back. One of my favorite vignettes is when I was at University of Chicago. When I was vice president for research, I worked with Don Randall, was president of University of Chicago. He's a musicologist. Actually spoke at my inauguration, and probably the only musicologist who's ever spoken at a Caltech inauguration. And we were on a plane going somewhere, and there's Don, and he's reading Science magazine, and there I'm sitting next to him reading The New Yorker. And I thought, boy, this captures exactly what we should be doing. So that mix has been very valuable. I think, right now, if this isn't a time where you see the value of trying to understand a technological society and the challenges for our kids and our grandkids with climate change, and all that's clear. But if you don't understand that you have to contemplate what history teaches you, to be able to grapple with what's going on now, whether it be legal, ethical, moral, and if you don't have the release and the education that comes from great literature, I think you're at a huge disadvantage in terms of functioning and contributing to society. And I think for our students, it's very important that they understand that. I tell them, now not all the undergraduates are as enthusiastic about this notion, to be honest, but I tell them not only will they be better human beings, they'll be better scientists.
I believe that. Yeah. Let's shift. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your role as a college president. And to point out that today, college presidents are repeatedly asked to speak on so many things, social, political, cultural controversies, and often immediately and publicly as well. So how do you decide as a president when to speak about something and when it might be a more responsible action to create a space for debate or disagreement or something?
So you're quite right. Those pressures are extreme, and they've gotten more extreme. So I have a very University of Chicago view of this, and informed by something called the Calvin Report. And I find it useful to think about it in these terms because it goes back to the fundamental question of what's a university about. A university, or a major research university, exists for creating knowledge and then transmitting that knowledge to the next generation of leaders. How do you create knowledge? You create knowledge through sharpening your ideas, through argument, honing your ideas, exchanging your ideas, being open to actually changing your mind, which is becoming less usual these days. And being committed to creating a civic environment which encourages that. So this notion, which is often called institutional neutrality, which, by the way, I really don't like that term because I don't think it captures what it's about. It's not that you don't care. It's that you want to create an environment as a university president where the members of your community feel free to express their ideas to the fullest extent, whether they're popular or unpopular, and then exchange those ideas with other members of the community, thereby creating knowledge. If the institution, thank you. So if the institution takes a strong position on one of those issues, then you quench, or you potentially quench, the ability of the members of your community to express their heartfelt views, whether they're right or wrong. And we all know that various views which are unpopular now may be popular later, but how do you know that unless you test it out? But the Calvin Report is also not absolute, and I think this is underappreciated in some of the descriptions of institutional neutrality, so-called institutional neutrality. The Calvin Report also points out that when there are issues that are fundamental to the mission of the university, you are free as an instantiation of the university. It's one of the odd things, as you know, of being a president. Yeah. You're seen as an instantiation of the university. That you are free in such cases to comment. So, for example, I will comment about the endowment tax. I will comment about immigration because we have an international community that comes. I will comment about the fact, even though it seems to be somewhat political these days, that there is truth and we believe in science as a mechanism to determine truth. And so on and so forth, because that's what we're about. Yeah. But I don't comment on Gaza, and I don't comment on Sudan, and I don't comment on things where even though there are many members of our community who are affected, my responsibility is to allow them to explore it, not to take some stand. So anyway, that's the thought process that goes through it.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about neutrality, which does seem kind of like Switzerland, or right. and that it really isn't a lack of passion or a willingness to stand up for what affects the institution.
Right.
Right.
Right. And I will say, not all my peers agree with this approach. I have a number of them who feel that they can disassociate their positions as individuals, which they may hold passionately, from the institution. Personally, I don't believe that, not because the institution isn't different from you as an individual, but I think the perception of the outside world is such that if you speak out as a president, people will assume that this is an official position of the institution, and that can do damage. Now, it's subtle damage, but over time, that can add up in terms of the kind of community you want to create.
We're living in a moment of extraordinary scientific power. So many advances, AI being one of them, quantum technologies, planetary science, all the stuff that you do at Caltech, alongside deep uncertainty about how these tools are going to be used.
Right.
What risks do you see? How do you assess risks and benefits when it seems that scientific progress outstrips maybe our capacity for reflection?
No, that's a very nice way of putting
and judgment.
The rate of change is certainly increasing, and we see that with AI in particular. I personally don't believe the robots are going to take over, but there are clearly dangers. Pardon me?
That's heartening to hear.
Yes,
you say that.
right. But I'm not an expert in that area either. But maybe I can back up a little. Yeah. part of the irony of a lot of the rhetoric about science and the messages we're sending to the next generation of scientists is, because of uncertainty, and is this a good way to go, is, for me, this is one of the most wonderful times to be doing science. The questions we can ask: are we alone in the universe, right? Are there other habitable suns going back to, or planets going around other suns, so-called exoplanets? Or even, is there evidence of microbial life on Mars? We have the rocks there, we just have to go get them. And are we able to now combine imaging and AI and biology and map out the expression of every protein and every gene in a collection of cells in some sort of organ, understand how they communicate? I mean, we're just about there. Understand, right, if you have a tumor, the outside is different than the inside. So how would you target that tumor? And you don't put in a blender and say, yes, there are, these gazillion proteins. This is a physicist talking about biology. A gazillion proteins or genes, but you actually reconstruct a three-dimensional image and you understand how it's going. We can do that. We will, I believe, create a new quantum, a functioning fault-tolerant quantum computer in 5 to 7 years. 3 years ago, I wouldn't have said that, but I really actually believe there's enough progress now. We don't know exactly what that will do, except break codes. We know it will do that very well, so watch your bank account. No, I'm serious. Not that you should do it, but actually the U.S. has to think very hard about the ways that we do protection of information right now. So there's a good example of how do you put in guardrails. What is it? But I think it's naive to think that we're going to stop science. We could say that AI, which has wonderful capabilities, also has terrible capabilities. Think of warfare and what you can do with automated warfare. Think about surveillance technology, right? Those are all negatives. It also will read radiographs in ways that will diagnose disease. It will help, if we can control the pace of change in an intelligent way, it will help make people's jobs easier. So you have these trade-offs, but to say we're just going to stop is very hard. And by the way, even if the United States says it's going to stop, that doesn't mean other countries around the world are going to stop. So I think we have to try to forecast to the greatest extent where the dangers are and be proactive in communicating about them. I'm not optimistic about severe government regulation, but some sort of government regulation. You see that debate already taking place between the European approach and the American approach. But I think the communication aspect and the international quality of science and the ability to cross boundaries, if allowed to proceed, will be very helpful in terms of sorting this out. And we have examples. We have examples in molecular biology at the Asilomar conference, where David Baltimore, one of my predecessors who tragically just passed, was a key person in terms of being able to bring together the community, talk about what the boundaries should be, and get a moral consensus that was international about where one should push and where one shouldn't push. And so I think that's the only effective model from my point of view. But as you point out, things are now, the pace of change is so rapid that there's some real immediacy to these kind of questions.
One more question, and please pass your, I think we're at the point where we'll collect questions from the audience and try to answer them, so there'll be somebody coming around to get those. But I still have a couple to ask you, but let me ask this. When you think about your presidency, what challenged you the most as a human being, not just as a leader of a scientific institution, and what are you most proud of?
So the pandemic was pretty scary, but it has multiple aspects to it. Obviously we were all scared because you could die, right? I mean, that's a very blatant way of putting it. And it was somewhat uncharted territory. Now, if we knew more history about the 1918 flu epidemic, going back to that, maybe we would have had a faster response. It was actually a miracle that the mRNA technology wound up with a vaccine as fast as it did, but it was a year and a half, where we were really doing things on the fly. We were going remote, trying to deliver an education. We were continuing our research, but trying to keep people safe in terms of occupancy. We were trying to give people information by doing our own testing. We're scientists, after all, and collecting the data. But it was really uncharted territory. But we came together as a community to deal with it. I'm very proud of that. And we saw our way through it, and science did come to the rescue. What has been more challenging, to be honest, is the current situation we're going through now. Because the cruelty that's involved, the randomness that's involved is all man-made or avoidable. And so it's harder to take. Now, we're navigating our way through it. We're coming together as a community. But I think a lot of the values we have in academia and the belief in science, as I was saying, are under stress. And I find it as a person much harder to deal with that part, as scared as I was by the pandemic. I mean, it's a virus, right? I mean, it was tragic. A lot of people lost their lives. But there's no malice associated with that. What am I most proud of? I'm proud of the people we were able to continue to attract to Caltech. That's what it's all about, at every level. Students, faculty, postdocs, staff, and creating a culture and an environment, or I didn't create it, maintaining and I hope enhancing a culture and environment where people want to be part of that community, where they're free to let their imaginations run, where they can do something beyond themselves and create something that gives life meaning. And you know, that's the gratification of doing this kind of job, is that you are part of that, and you help propagate those values and those successes.
What you said about expertise is crucial. I mean, there's such mistrust, misinformation, but such mistrust of expertise, whether it's in science or journalism or anything. How do you see recovering from that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of keys, but I don't have any easy solutions. One is we do have a reputation as scientists, sometimes deserve to being arrogant about what we do. And that's not helpful.
Yeah.
And I would say the other thing is that everything's gotten so mixed up with politics that creating an identity and presentation of information that is explicitly apolitical and admits what we know and what we don't know, and the fact that science is a dynamic enterprise which is constantly being tested, so the answer can change. Getting that across seems to me to be key. And we're trying to do some things. Please look at the Caltech Science Exchange on your web, which presents unbiased views of things like, how safe are elections, how safe, about virology and pandemics, about quantum mechanics, for those of you who I know are just eager to get out and learn more, and so on and so forth. And so we'd like to be a trusted source of information, but it's a hard world these days with so many different sources of information and so much polarization. But I think we're going to have to come together as a society in terms of general understanding of issues and acceptance of sources if we're going to solve this.
Thanks. Wow, there are a lot of questions. One kind of follows up on what you've been saying. How is Caltech impacted by and responding to federal funding cuts?
Right.
We haven't talked a lot about money.
Right. So, yes, it is fine. We've been okay so far. Don't tell anybody. There's a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of threats. So far, we're doing fine in the level of federal funding. I think the greatest threat is there's a politicization of the process. Caltech does it very well. If merit is the criterion, or the major criterion, once you introduce geographic distribution, what your overhead rate is, which state you're in, red or blue, we'd be under threat longer term. We're being relatively conservative, but it's more a case, so we're not making huge new investments, but we also don't want to do things that cause long-term damage that are preemptively reacting. And so I have some confidence. I'm an optimist anyway, but I have some confidence we'll maneuver our way through this. I think the latest congressional actions, which show bipartisan support of science from Congress, are very helpful. What I worry about the most, to be honest, is what we're doing in terms of encouraging young people and encouraging international scholars to come into science, to come to the U.S. And I think that will have the longest term effect. I mean, we compete with 4.2% of the world's population because really brilliant people from around the world come to the U.S. I mean, that's a history statement. And if we cut that off, we won't be competitive. And I'm afraid that even if we change policy, funding can go up and down, but even if we change policy, if you poison the well, it takes a long time before people believe that this is a good place to come to.
This question follows up with what you just said, and maybe you've answered it, but are you concerned with decreasing collaboration among overseas universities in view of the current?
Yeah, I'm concerned. Now, some of those collaborations go on just fine, sub rosa, really. I think with China is an exception. There are many more restrictions in terms of interaction with Chinese universities. Otherwise, I think, look, during the Cold War, the Pugwash conferences existed where there was exchange of a lot of physics information. In fact, after the Cold War, that was an essential component of trying to understand what to do with the Soviet nuclear arsenal and so on and so forth. So I think that, I have some confidence that those kind of connections will continue, but I think the movement of people is going to be severely restricted, and that will impact it. And so I see it more in terms of the movement of people and its effect on the dissemination of ideas than the actual hope for some collaborations that cross borders.
We have reviewers who are going to come to help review our fellowship applications coming from other countries who are afraid that they might get back or don't want to be here.
Right, and you can imagine the number of students we have who are afraid to go home.
Yeah.
Because they may not get back into the country.
Okay, on another note, a question. As you recall from the movie Contact, did you see that?
Yeah, Jodie Foster.
Jodie Foster's opinion when falling through the wormhole was, no words, they should have sent a poet. Do you see the value of sending a poet to space? Actually, Charles Alachi was here for Why It Matters, and I think that Ada Limon's poem was on,
it was
was
on Europa. So
on
on the mission to one of the moons of Jupiter. That's correct.
Yeah.
Sure, I don't know if you need to have the corporeal being, but that sensibility is very good. Yeah.
lot of concern about funding and let's see. As leaders of globally recognized institutions embedded in a local community, how do you think about balancing excellence and global impact with meaningful service to Pasadena and surrounding communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're embedded in a local community. What we do affects the local community, and we have a responsibility to use some of our capabilities to support the community. It is not our main mission, right? Our main mission is to create knowledge and to educate. But we have a lot of activities with Pasadena Unified School District, with LA Unified School District, to reach out to students, tutoring programs. Our students love to do that, and it's very rewarding for them, and I think it's an important part of what we can do. After the fires, we did a lot of testing. We have monitors up and report on lead particles and asbestos and other such harmful issues. And so we can bring our technological capabilities for the benefit of the community. I think it's very important. We're the largest employer in Pasadena, so obviously we contribute in that fashion as well. So we take very seriously that part. I would say also the stronger community Pasadena is, and I include in that obviously the Huntington, even though you're over a boundary there. You know,
I haven't said the word San Marino. I feel like I should say the word San Marino.
Yes,
too.
and you are. It's a pretty fluid boundary, but the point is people will come here because of the various accoutrements that they find in the community. So we have an interest. We're setting up an innovation center a couple of blocks north of our campus to we spin off a lot of companies to try to keep those companies in Pasadena and create the jobs that come from them. So it's being woven into community, I think, is a really important part of what we can do. I would say that I don't see us, though, and we get a lot of requests to send money here or send money there. You know, we're a charitable organization, actually. But what I like to see in terms of connection to community is something that's meaningful, where we can use the skills, whether it's educating students, younger students, or whether it's providing the kind of resources, engineering and science resources that directly affect people's lives. And so that's been our emphasis.
Yeah, I would say that part of our strategic goal is to make the impact of our collections, to expand the impact. And some of that has to do with access, whether it's access to our collections, broadening the definition of someone who comes, because we're not a public library, for example, who has the definition of a research project or for a reader, but also with our education programs. I think all third graders in Pasadena come to study plants and soil at the Huntington, have a visit here. And, and we're using digital resources, even though we're such a place-based place that there's nothing like actually coming, and I talked about primary materials. But it'd be silly for us not to think about if we have developed these, if we have these resources, how can you convey that digitally to reach a much wider? So we're actually doing some videos through a project that the education program has to extend that much further. And we'd love to combine it with a visit here, but that's all part of what we think is part of our mission.
I think that's so important. And you talked about plant biology, and we really haven't talked about that.
Yes.
But there's another opportunity for us to collaborate more deeply. The joke at Caltech used to be, we have great plant biology. His name is Elliot Meyerowitz. But we have hired a bunch of young people now in that area, and the Carnegie Institute of Science, and we've talked about this, of course, is moving their biology efforts to Pasadena. Right. And so I think here's another opportunity where we can build community among different institutions.
Yeah, actually, I should have mentioned that even more as we've talked about the history of science, because we're we're very involved with Nicole Cavender as director of the gardens,
Right.
very involved internationally on consortium around plant theft, around ethical sourcing, around all of that. And that's an area, and cryopreservation, which is something, really trying to maintain species and do all of that. So I know we have talked about that.
Right.
We'll leave that as something that will be ongoing in the future, because we promise not just to talk about the past,
Right.
but to talk about
Yeah,
the future. So I think that that's very much a part of things. So thank you so much
Oh, thank you.
for this lovely, lovely chat that we've been able to have with everyone. Thank you all for coming.
you. Oh, thank you. Oh. All right.